Right now, you're looking at a monument older than history itself. 3 colossal pyramids rising from the desert sands, aligned with celestial precision as if built by gods, not men. These are the Pyramids of Giza, eternal sentinels standing for over 4,000 years, guarding secrets carved in limestone and starlight. Each block, each shadow, whispers of an ancient intelligence we are only beginning to comprehend. Tonight we journey beyond the myths, through hidden chambers, lost texts, and cosmic alignments that defy coincidence. From the pharaoh's divine ambitions to the messages they may have left for the future, we'll uncover what the ancients tried to tell us. If you're ready to see the pyramids as never before, let the journey begin. What if the Great Pyramids were not built just to honour the dead, but to speak to the living, to send a message across time? Stand before them now, in your mind. 3 colossal monuments rising from the desert sand, their limestone faces catching the first light of dawn. They have stood there for more than 4,000 years, silent and immovable, watching empires rise and crumble into dust. Pharaohs, conquerors, scholars, and dreamers have all gazed upon them, and each has asked the same question. Why? Why were they built with such impossible precision? Why do they endure when everything else has fallen away? The pyramids are not simply tombs. They are not merely monuments to vanity or power. They are something else entirely, something deliberate, something encoded. They stand at the edge of the known world and the forgotten one, bridging the gap between what we understand and what we have lost. And perhaps, just perhaps, they were never meant for the people who built them. Perhaps they were meant for us. The desert wind moves across the Giza plateau, carrying with it the whispers of millennia. The sand shifts and settles, revealing and concealing in equal measure. And beneath it all, the pyramids remain, patient, eternal, waiting for someone to finally understand what the ancients tried to tell us. The story begins in the 4th dynasty of ancient Egypt, around 2580 BCE. When a pharaoh named Khufu ascended to the throne. His reign would last only 23 years, a brief flicker in the long history of Egypt, yet what he left behind would outlast every kingdom that followed. The Great Pyramid, his pyramid, would become the largest structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years, a record unbroken until the construction of medieval cathedrals in Europe. But even those pale in comparison to the sheer audacity of what was accomplished on the Giza plateau. Imagine the world as it was then. No cranes, no steel, no engines. The wheel had barely been invented, and yet somehow the ancient Egyptians moved more than 2 million limestone blocks, each weighing between 2 and 15 tons, across miles of desert, and lifted them into place with such precision that a razor blade cannot fit between the joints. The base of the Great Pyramid covers 13 acres, and its 4 sides are aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal directions, north, south, east and west, with an error of less than 4 minutes of arc. To put that in perspective, modern architects with laser technology would struggle to achieve such accuracy. The pyramid originally stood at 481 feet tall, its apex crowned with a capstone that may have been covered in gold or electrum, gleaming like a beacon across the desert. The outer casing stones were polished white limestone, so smooth and reflective that ancient travellers reported seeing the pyramid shine like a jewel under the sun, visible from miles away. Most of those casing stones are gone now, stripped away over centuries to build the mosques and palaces of Cairo, but a few remain near the top, hinting at the magnificence that once was. Inside, the pyramid is a labyrinth of passages and chambers. The Grand Gallery rises at a steep angle, its corbelled ceiling soaring 28 feet high, each stone perfectly fitted to create a space that feels both monumental and intimate. At the heart of the structure lies the King's Chamber, a room of red granite transported from quarries 500 miles away. The chamber contains a granite sarcophagus, empty and unadorned, its purpose still debated by scholars. Was it truly meant to hold the body of Khufu, or was it something else? A vessel for transformation, a gateway, a symbol of something we no longer understand? The construction itself defies easy explanation. Egyptologists tell us that the pyramid was built over 20 years by a workforce of tens of thousands, skilled labourers, not slaves, as popular myth suggests. They lived in workers' villages nearby, fed and housed by the state, their efforts coordinated with the precision of a military campaign. Copper tools, wooden sledges, and ramps of mud, brick and limestone chips. These were the technologies available, and yet, with these simple means, they created something that still baffles engineers today. How did they quarry the stones with such uniformity? How did they transport them across the Nile during the flood season, then drag them up the plateau? How did they lift blocks weighing as much as 70 tons to heights of hundreds of feet? Theories abound: straight ramps, spiral ramps, internal ramps, counterweights, levers, but none fully explain the speed and precision of the work. 20 years to place 2 million blocks means setting one block every 2 minutes, working day and night without pause. The mathematics alone seem impossible, and yet the pyramid stands as proof that it was done. But the Great Pyramid is not alone. Beside it stand two others, the Pyramid of Khafra, Khufu's son, and the Pyramid of Menkaure, his grandson. Together they form a trinity on the plateau, their placements seemingly deliberate, their sizes descending in a careful progression. Khafra's pyramid appears taller because it sits on higher ground, but it is actually slightly smaller than Khufu's. Menkaure's pyramid is the smallest of the three, yet it was built with the same meticulous care, its lower courses clad in red granite that must have glowed like fire at sunset. Around them sprawl the remnants of a vast necropolis, smaller pyramids for queens, mastaba tombs for nobles and officials, causeways and temples where rituals were performed to ensure the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife. And watching over it all, carved from a single outcrop of limestone, sits the great Sphinx, a creature with the body of a lion and the face of a king, its gaze fixed eternally on the eastern horizon where the sun rises each morning. The Sphinx is older than the pyramids, some researchers claim, its weathering patterns suggesting it was carved thousands of years before Khafra's reign. Others argue it was built alongside the pyramids, its features eroded by wind and sand rather than water. The debate continues, but the Sphinx remains silent, keeping its secrets as it has for millennia. This is the world the ancient Egyptians created, a landscape of stone and symbol, where every angle and measurement carried meaning, where the boundary between the earthly and the divine was deliberately blurred. They built not just for their own time, but for eternity. They built to be remembered, and they built perhaps to be understood. But understood how, and by whom? The ancient Egyptians did not see the world as we do. For them, the universe was alive with meaning, every star and stone connected by invisible threads of divine order. The pyramids were not simply architectural achievements, they were cosmic machines, designed to align the earthly realm with the heavens above. To understand what the ancients tried to tell us, we must first understand how they saw the sky. Look up on a clear night, far from the lights of the modern world, and you will see what they saw. The Milky Way stretching across the darkness like a river of light. The Egyptians called it the Nile of the sky, a celestial mirror of the great river that gave them life, and within that river they saw patterns, constellations that told stories of gods and creation. One constellation held special significance: Orion. The Egyptians knew it as Sa, the celestial form of Osiris, the god of death and resurrection. Osiris was the first pharaoh, murdered by his brother Set and resurrected by his wife Isis, becoming the lord of the underworld and the judge of souls. Every pharaoh was believed to become Osiris in death, journeying through the underworld to be reborn among the stars, and the pyramids, some believe, were built to facilitate that journey. In the early 1980s, a researcher named Robert Bauval proposed something extraordinary. He noticed that the three pyramids of Giza are not arranged in a straight line, but in a pattern that mirrors the three stars of Orion's belt: Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka. The two larger pyramids align almost perfectly with the two brighter stars, while the smaller pyramid of Menkaure sits slightly offset, just as Mintaka sits slightly offset from the other two stars. The correlation is striking, and it raises a tantalizing question. did the ancient Egyptians deliberately position the pyramids to reflect the constellation of Osiris? Bauval went further. He calculated that around 10,500 BCE, the constellation of Orion would have reached its lowest point in the precessional cycle, sitting directly on the southern horizon at the meridian. At that same moment, the Sphinx, if it was indeed that old, would have been facing the constellation of Leo, the lion rising in the east. Was this the moment the pyramids were meant to commemorate? A time when the sky and the earth were in perfect alignment, when the gods walked among mortals? Mainstream archaeology dismisses this theory, pointing out that the pyramids were built around 2500 BCE, not 10,500 BCE, and that the alignment with Orion's belt, while intriguing, may be coincidental. The ancient Egyptians left no written records explicitly stating that the pyramids were meant to mirror the stars, and yet the correlation remains, undeniable and haunting. But the stellar alignment is only one layer of the mystery. The pyramids are also aligned with extraordinary precision to the cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. The Great Pyramid's north-south axis deviates from true north by only 3/60ths of a degree, an accuracy that would require sophisticated astronomical observations. How did the ancient Egyptians achieve this? They had no compasses, no GPS, no satellites. They had only the stars. One method they may have used is called the Indian Circle method, which involves tracking the rising and setting points of a star over the course of a night and bisecting the angle between them to find true north. Another method involves observing the circumpolar stars, stars that never set below the horizon, and using their circular path to determine the celestial pole. Either way, the process would have required patience, precision, and a deep understanding of the heavens. The interior of the Great Pyramid also reveals astronomical alignments. The so-called air shafts in the King's Chamber and Queen's Chamber are not air shafts at all, but narrow passages that point towards specific stars. The southern shaft of the King's Chamber aligns with Alnitak, the brightest star in Orion's belt, while the northern shaft points toward Thuban, which was the pole star in ancient Egypt. The southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber aligns with Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, associated with the goddess Isis. These alignments are not random, they are deliberate, encoded into the very structure of the pyramid. What were the ancient Egyptians trying to achieve? Some believe the shafts were meant to guide the pharaoh's soul on its journey to the stars, providing a direct path to the realm of the gods. Others suggest they served a more practical purpose, allowing priests to observe the stars from within the pyramid and perform rituals at specific astronomical moments. Still others propose that the shafts were part of a larger system of energy or resonance, channeling forces we no longer understand. The geometry of the pyramids also carries symbolic weight. The Great Pyramid's dimensions encode the mathematical constant pi, the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. The pyramid's perimeter divided by twice its height equals 3/14, a number the ancient Egyptians were not supposed to know. They also encoded the golden ratio, phi, a proportion found throughout nature, and considered aesthetically perfect. The slope of the pyramid's sides, the dimensions of the chambers, the placement of the passages, all of these follow geometric principles that suggest a sophisticated understanding of mathematics and proportion. Was this knowledge intuitive, developed through trial and error over centuries of pyramid building, or was it inherited from an earlier, more advanced civilization, now lost to history? The ancient Egyptians themselves spoke of a time before the pharaohs, a golden age when the gods ruled directly over the land. They called it Zep Tepi, the first time, a mythical epoch when the foundations of civilization were laid. Could the pyramids be remnants of that forgotten age built by hands we no longer remember? The questions multiply the deeper we look. The pyramids are not just monuments. They are puzzles, riddles carved in stone. Every measurement, every alignment, every chamber and passage seems to whisper of something greater, something hidden just beyond our understanding. The ancients built them to last forever, and they built them to be read. But the language they used is not one of words. It is a language of stars and stone, of geometry and light. And if we could learn to read it, what would it say? The Pyramids of Giza do not stand alone in the world. Across oceans and continents separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, other civilizations built pyramids of their own. In the jungles of Mesoamerica, the Maya and the Aztecs raised stepped pyramids to honor their gods. In the deserts of Sudan, the Nubian kings constructed steep-sided pyramids as tombs. In China, massive earthen mounds shaped like pyramids hold the remains of emperors, and in the Pacific on remote islands, stone platforms and terraces echo the same geometric forms. Why? Why did so many cultures with no apparent contact choose the pyramid as their sacred shape? Was it simply the most stable structure to build with primitive tools? Or was there something deeper, a shared memory, a universal symbol, a message passed down through the ages? The Maya pyramids of Central America are perhaps the most striking parallel. The Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, the Temple of the Inscriptions at Palenque, the towering structures of Tikal, all of them share the same monumental ambition as the pyramids of Egypt. They were built as stairways to the heavens, places where priests could ascend to commune with the gods. They were aligned with astronomical events, solstices, equinoxes, the movements of Venus and the moon. They were tombs, temples and observatories all at once. The Temple of Kukulkan is a masterpiece of astronomical engineering. It has 4 staircases, each with 91 steps, which together with the platform at the top total 365, the number of days in a solar year. During the spring and autumn equinoxes, the setting sun casts shadows on the pyramid's northern staircase that create the illusion of a serpent descending from the heavens, a representation of the feathered serpent god Kukulkan. The Maya built this pyramid not just as a monument, but as a calendar, a cosmic clock marking the passage of time. The similarities to the Egyptian pyramids are undeniable, yet the differences are equally striking. The Maya pyramids are stepped, not smooth-sided, and they were built with a different purpose. Not as tombs for individual kings, but as communal temples where rituals were performed for the entire society. The Maya also developed a sophisticated writing system, a complex calendar, and advanced mathematical concepts, including the use of zero, achievements that rival those of ancient Egypt. Could the Maya and the Egyptians have shared knowledge? Conventional history says no. The Maya civilization flourished between 2000 BCE and 1500 CE, overlapping with ancient Egypt, but separated by an ocean that, as far as we know, neither culture crossed. There is no archaeological evidence of contact, no Egyptian artifacts found in Mesoamerica, no Maya glyphs discovered in Egypt. And yet, the parallels persist. Some researchers point to the legend of Atlantis, the lost civilization described by Plato, as a possible link. According to Plato, Atlantis was a powerful maritime empire that existed around 9600 BCE, before being destroyed in a cataclysmic event. If such a civilization existed, could it have spread its knowledge to both Egypt and Mesoamerica before its fall? Could the pyramids be remnants of that lost wisdom, built by cultures trying to preserve what they had learned? Mainstream scholars dismissed the Atlantis theory as myth, noting that Plato likely invented the story as a philosophical allegory. There is no geological evidence for a sunken continent in the Atlantic, and the timeline Plato gives does not match the known history of human civilization. But the idea persists, fueled by the tantalizing similarities between ancient cultures and the sense that something is missing from the historical record. In China, the pyramids are less well known but no less impressive. Near the city of Xi'an, dozens of massive earthen mounds rise from the plains, some as tall as 300 feet. These are the tombs of ancient Chinese emperors, built during the Qin and Han dynasties. The most famous is the tomb of Emperor Qin Shi Huang, guarded by the Terracotta Army. Thousands of life-sized clay soldiers buried to protect the emperor in the afterlife. The tomb itself has never been fully excavated, but ancient texts describe it as a vast underground palace, complete with rivers of mercury and a ceiling studded with pearls to represent the stars. The Chinese pyramids are not as geometrically precise as those in Egypt, but they share the same symbolic purpose: to bridge the gap between earth and heaven, to ensure the ruler's immortality, to encode cosmic order into physical form. The Chinese also developed sophisticated astronomical knowledge, tracking the movements of planets and stars, predicting eclipses, and aligning their structures with celestial events. In Sudan, the Nubian pyramids stand as a testament to a civilization that was once Egypt's rival, and, at times, its conqueror. The Nubian kings built more than 200 pyramids, smaller and steeper than their Egyptian counterparts, but no less significant. These pyramids were tombs, filled with treasures and inscriptions honouring the dead. The Nubians adopted many aspects of Egyptian culture, including the worship of Egyptian gods and the use of hieroglyphic writing, but they also maintained their own distinct identity. The fact that the Nubians built pyramids is less surprising, given their proximity to Egypt and their long history of cultural exchange. But it raises another question. If the pyramid form was so powerful, so meaningful, why did it eventually disappear? Why did later civilizations abandon it in favour of other architectural styles? Perhaps the answer lies in the changing nature of belief. The pyramids were built during a time when the boundary between the human and the divine was thin, when kings were seen as gods, and the afterlife was as real as the world of the living. As religions evolved, as empires rose and fell, the need for such monumental expressions of faith diminished. The pyramids became relics of a bygone age, admired but no longer understood. Or perhaps the pyramids served a purpose that was fulfilled. Perhaps the message they were meant to convey was delivered, and there was no need to build more. Perhaps they were never meant to be replicated, only remembered. But what if the pyramids were not just monuments to the past? What if they were also messages to the future, to us? In the modern age, the pyramids have become the subject of countless theories, some grounded in science, others veering into the realm of speculation and wonder. They have been called power plants, energy generators, acoustic chambers, astronomical computers, and even landing markers for extraterrestrial visitors. Each theory attempts to explain the same fundamental mystery. How could a civilization with such limited technology create something so advanced? One of the most intriguing theories involves the idea that the Great Pyramid was designed to harness energy. Proponents of this theory point to the pyramid's construction materials: limestone, which contains calcite crystals that can generate electricity under pressure, and granite, which contains quartz and is slightly radioactive. The king's chamber is built entirely of granite, and some researchers have detected unusual electromagnetic readings within it. Could the pyramid have been designed to generate or amplify energy in some way? The theory suggests that the pyramid's shape itself acts as a resonator, focusing energy at specific points within the structure. The Grand Gallery, with its towering corbelled ceiling, may have functioned as an acoustic chamber, amplifying sound waves to create resonance. Some experiments have shown that certain frequencies produce standing waves within the pyramid, creating patterns of vibration that could theoretically be harnessed for various purposes. But what purposes? Advocates of the energy theory propose that the pyramid could have been used for healing, communication, or even levitation, using sound and vibration to manipulate matter. Ancient texts speak of priests using sound to move heavy objects, and some researchers believe the pyramids were built using acoustic levitation, a phenomenon where sound waves create enough pressure to lift objects off the ground. Modern science has demonstrated acoustic levitation on a small scale, but whether it could be used to move multi-ton blocks remains unproven. Another theory focuses on the pyramid's alignment with Earth's geography. The Great Pyramid sits almost exactly at the centre of the Earth's landmass, with equal amounts of land in all directions. Its latitude and longitude coordinates encode the speed of light, 299,458 meters per second, a number the ancient Egyptians were not supposed to know. Coincidence, or evidence of knowledge far beyond what we attribute to them? The pyramid's dimensions also encode the size and shape of the Earth. The perimeter of the pyramid's base multiplied by 43,200 equals the circumference of the Earth at the equator. The height of the pyramid multiplied by the same number equals the polar radius of the Earth. The number 43,200 is significant in many ancient cultures. It appears in Hindu cosmology, in Babylonian astronomy, and in the precessional cycle of the equinoxes. Could the pyramid be a scale model of the Earth, built to preserve geodetic knowledge? Mainstream archaeologists argue that these numerical correlations are the result of selective interpretation, that if you look hard enough, you can find mathematical patterns in any structure. They point out that the ancient Egyptians used a different system of measurement, the royal cubit, and that converting their measurements to modern units inevitably produces approximations and errors. The speed of light encoded in the coordinates, they say, is a coincidence. a product of our modern numbering system rather than ancient intent. But the theories persist, fueled by the sense that the pyramids are more than they appear. Some researchers have proposed that the pyramids were part of a global network of ancient structures, all aligned with each other and with specific points on the Earth's energy grid. Ley lines, they call them, invisible lines of power that crisscross the planet, connecting sacred sites and ancient monuments. The Pyramids of Giza, Stonehenge, the Nazca Lines, Easter Island, all of them, according to this theory, are nodes in a vast system of energy and communication. The idea of a global civilization, one that existed before recorded history and possessed advanced knowledge, has captured the imagination of many. Graham Hancock, a journalist and author, has spent decades researching this possibility, arguing that a cataclysmic event around 12,000 years ago, possibly a comet impact or rapid climate change, destroyed this civilization, leaving only scattered remnants and myths. The pyramids, he suggests, may be survivors of that lost age, built by people who knew the world was ending and wanted to preserve their knowledge for future generations. Hancock points to geological evidence of rapid sea level rise at the end of the last ice age, which would have flooded coastal areas where early civilizations might have thrived. He also notes the prevalence of flood myths in cultures around the world, the story of Noah's Ark, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Hindu tale of Manu, the Greek legend of Deucalion. Could these myths be memories of a real event, a global catastrophe that reset human civilization? Critics argue that Hancock's theories lack concrete evidence and rely too heavily on speculation. They point out that the archaeological record shows a clear progression of human development, from simple hunter-gatherer societies to complex civilizations, with no need to invoke a lost advanced culture. The similarities between ancient myths, they say, can be explained by the universal human experience of natural disasters, floods, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, rather than a single global event. And yet, the questions remain. Why do the pyramids exist? Why were they built with such precision, such ambition, such permanence? What were the ancient Egyptians trying to achieve, and what did they want us to know? Perhaps the answer is simpler than we think. Perhaps the pyramids were built not to encode secret knowledge or harness mysterious energies, but to inspire awe, to remind us of what humanity is capable of when we work together toward a common goal. Perhaps they were built to last forever because the ancients understood something we have forgotten, that civilizations rise and fall, that empires crumble, that everything we build will eventually turn to dust. Everything except the pyramids. They stand as a testament to human ambition, human ingenuity, human faith. They stand as a reminder that we are part of something larger than ourselves, something that stretches back through time and forward into eternity. They stand as a question, carved in stone, waiting for us to answer. What if the message the ancients tried to tell us is not hidden in the measurements, or the alignments, or the chambers? What if the message is the pyramids themselves, the simple, profound fact that they exist, that they endure, that they refuse to be forgotten? But perhaps we've been asking the wrong questions all along. We ask how they were built, as if understanding the engineering would unlock the mystery. We ask why they were built, as if discovering the purpose would satisfy our curiosity. We measure and calculate and theorize, treating the pyramids as problems to be solved rather than mysteries to be experienced. And in doing so, we may be missing what the ancients actually wanted us to see. Because the pyramids were not built in isolation. They were not constructed in a vacuum of history, dropped fully formed onto the Giza plateau by some inexplicable force. They emerged from a culture, a civilization, a way of seeing the world that was fundamentally different from our own. To understand what the ancients tried to tell us, we must first understand who they were, not just as builders or engineers or priests, but as human beings living in a world alive with meaning. The Egypt of the Fourth Dynasty was not the Egypt of popular imagination. It was not a land of slaves toiling under the whip, building monuments to tyrannical pharaohs drunk on power and vanity. That image, perpetuated by Hollywood and centuries of misunderstanding, bears little resemblance to what archaeology has revealed. The people who built the pyramids were skilled workers, craftsmen, and labourers who took pride in their work. They lived in purpose-built villages near the construction sites, with bakeries, breweries, and medical facilities. They were fed with meat and bread, a diet far richer than what most Egyptians consumed. Their bones show evidence of medical care. Broken limbs that were set and healed, infections that were treated, workplace injuries that were tended to with surprising sophistication. These were not expendable slaves, but valued members of society, participating in what they believed to be the most important work in the world. Graffiti left by work gangs inside the pyramids reveals something even more striking. These workers organized themselves into teams with names like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure. They competed with each other, marking their accomplishments in red ochre on the stones they placed. There is humour in these inscriptions, pride, camaraderie. These were not people coerced into labour, but people who believed they were building something sacred, something that would ensure the prosperity of Egypt and the eternal life of their king. Why would they believe this? Why would tens of thousands of people devote decades of their lives to moving stones? The answer lies in the Egyptian understanding of Ma'at, a concept that has no direct translation in English, but encompasses truth, justice, harmony, and cosmic order. Ma'at was not just a philosophical idea, it was the fundamental principle that held the universe together. The pharaoh was the guarantor of Ma'at, the living link between the human world and the divine realm. When the pharaoh died, the entire cosmic order was threatened. The pyramid was not just a tomb, it was a machine for maintaining Ma'at, for ensuring that the king could be transformed into a god and continue to protect Egypt from the chaos that lurked at the edges of creation. This is why the pyramid had to be perfect. This is why every measurement mattered, why every stone had to be precisely placed, why the alignment with the stars could not be off by even a fraction of a degree. The pyramid was not a monument to ego, it was a cosmic necessity, a ritual performed in stone to keep the universe functioning. The religious texts of ancient Egypt support this interpretation. The pyramid texts carved into the walls of later pyramids are among the oldest religious writings in human history. They describe the pharaoh's journey after death, how he ascends to the sky, how he joins the circumpolar stars that never set, how he becomes one with the gods. The pyramid is described as a ladder, a ramp, a stairway to heaven. The pharaoh climbs the rays of the sun, sails across the sky in the solar bark, passes through the gates of the underworld, and emerges transformed. These texts are not metaphorical. To the ancient Egyptians, this journey was as real as any physical voyage. The pyramid was the vehicle that made it possible, and every element of its construction served this ultimate purpose. The passages and chambers were not arbitrary. They were maps of the afterlife, recreations of the cosmic landscape the pharaoh would traverse. The sarcophagus in the king's chamber was not just a box for a body, it was a womb of regeneration, where the dead king would be reborn as a star. Understanding this changes everything about how we interpret the pyramids. The air shafts are not ventilation, they are soul channels, pathways for the K, life force, and Bear, personality, to travel between the burial chamber and the stars. The Grand Gallery is not just an architectural feature, it is a representation of the ascending path to heaven, a physical embodiment of the moment of transformation. The empty sarcophagus is not evidence of tomb robbery. It may never have been meant to hold a physical body at all, only to serve as a symbolic vessel for spiritual rebirth. This religious context also explains something else that has puzzled researchers: why the interior of the Great Pyramid is so austere. There are no paintings, no decorations, no gold or jewels. Later Egyptian tombs would be filled with treasures and adorned with elaborate paintings depicting the deceased's life and afterlife. But the Great Pyramid is bare stone, its chambers unadorned except for a few marks left by construction workers. Why? Perhaps because the pyramid itself is the message. Perhaps because the geometry, the proportions, the alignments, these were the decorations more meaningful than any image could be. Perhaps because the pyramid was meant to function, not to impress, and every element served a purpose beyond the aesthetic. Or perhaps because the pyramid was built for an understanding of the divine that transcended images, that saw the sacred in number and proportion, and cosmic correspondence rather than in representation. Yet even within this religious framework, mysteries persist. The more we learn about the ancient Egyptians, the more sophisticated they appear, and the more questions arise about where their knowledge came from. Consider their understanding of medicine. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, dating to around 1600 BCE but likely copied from much older sources, describes 48 surgical cases with a rational empirical approach that would not be seen again until the classical Greek period. The Egyptians performed surgery, set broken bones, treated infections, and even conducted a form of brain surgery. They understood the pulse and recognized it as connected to the heart. They used honey as an antibiotic, willow bark as a painkiller, and mouldy bread as a treatment for infections, techniques that modern science has confirmed as effective. Their understanding of mathematics was equally advanced. They used a decimal system and could solve complex problems involving fractions, areas and volumes. They calculated the area of a circle using a formula that approximates pi to within less than 1% of accuracy. They understood the Pythagorean theorem 1,000 years before Pythagoras. The Moscow mathematical papyrus shows calculations for the volume of a truncated pyramid, the exact knowledge needed to plan the construction of the pyramids themselves. Their astronomy went far beyond simple observation. They tracked the movement of the sun, moon, and planets with precision. They identified the heliacal rising of Sirius, the moment when the star becomes visible again after a period of being obscured by the sun's light, and used it to predict the annual flooding of the Nile. They divided the year into 365 days, with 12 months of 30 days each plus 5 extra days, a calendar system so accurate it formed the basis for the Julian calendar used throughout Europe until the Renaissance. They mapped the night sky into 36 decans, 10-degree segments of the celestial sphere, and used them to tell time at night. Each decan would rise above the horizon at a specific time, allowing the Egyptians to divide the night into hours. This system required not just observation but calculation, accounting for the precession of the equinoxes and the slow shift of the stars over decades and centuries. Where did all this knowledge come from? The standard historical answer is that it developed gradually, through generations of observation and experimentation. The Egyptians built smaller pyramids before they built the Great Pyramid, learning from their mistakes and refining their techniques. They studied the stars because they needed a calendar for agriculture. They developed mathematics because they needed to survey land after the annual floods. Each advance built upon the previous one in a logical progression. But some researchers see gaps in this narrative. The first pyramid ever built, the Step Pyramid of Giza, was already a massive and sophisticated structure, rising 200 feet into the air and incorporating complex internal passages. It appears almost fully formed, with no obvious prototype or failed experiment preceding it. The Great Pyramid itself represents a level of ambition and precision that seems to leap beyond what the earlier pyramids would suggest as possible. And after the Fourth Dynasty, pyramid construction rapidly declined in quality. Later pyramids were smaller, cruder, built with inferior materials and less skill. It is as if the knowledge peaked and then faded, rather than building continuously over time. This pattern suggests to some that the knowledge might have been inherited rather than developed, passed down from an earlier period, or even an earlier civilization. The ancient Egyptians themselves spoke of the Zep Tepi, the first time when gods ruled directly over the land and taught humanity the arts of civilization. They attributed their knowledge to these divine teachers. Thoth, the god of wisdom; Ptah, the god of craftsmen; Imhotep, the architect of the Step Pyramid who was later deified. Were these gods simply mythological figures, personifications of abstract concepts? Or were they memories of real individuals, wise teachers or leaders whose accomplishments were so remarkable they were remembered as divine? Every culture has flood myths. Many cultures have legends of culture heroes who brought knowledge from somewhere else. The Sumerians spoke of the Apkallu, 7 sages who emerged from the sea to teach humanity. The Mesoamericans spoke of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who brought wisdom. The Indians spoke of the Rishis, enlightened beings who composed the Vedas. Are these all independent inventions or echoes of something real? Mainstream archaeology remains skeptical, pointing out that myths are not evidence, and that the archaeological record shows a clear developmental sequence. But the question lingers: why did the ancient Egyptians, at the very beginning of their civilization, build the most sophisticated and enduring structures they would ever create? Why does their greatest achievement appear at the start rather than the culmination of their culture? The mysteries deepen when we look beyond the pyramids themselves to the entire Giza complex, a landscape of stone and symbol that may encode layers of meaning we are only beginning to glimpse. The Great Sphinx is perhaps the most enigmatic element. Carved from a single outcrop of limestone, It sits in a hollow surrounded by walls of bedrock, staring eternally toward the east. Egyptologists traditionally date it to the reign of Khafre, around 2500 BCE, based on its proximity to Khafre's pyramid and the stylistic similarity of its face to known images of the pharaoh. But the Sphinx bears signs of weathering that some geologists argue could only have been caused by prolonged exposure to water. Not the occasional rain that falls in Egypt today, but sustained rainfall of the kind that ended in the region around 10,000 BCE. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University, examined the Sphinx in the early 1990s and concluded that the erosion patterns on its body and the walls of its enclosure were characteristic of water weathering rather than wind and sand erosion. If true, this would mean the Sphinx is far older than the pyramids, carved during a wetter climate when the Sahara was still green. The implications are staggering. It would suggest that sophisticated stone carving was practiced in Egypt thousands of years before the emergence of the pharaonic civilization. Orthodox Egyptologists dispute this interpretation, arguing that the weathering could be explained by other factors: underground water seepage, variations in the limestone's quality, or differences in how the stone was exposed and protected over millennia. They point out that there is no archaeological evidence of a civilization capable of carving the Sphinx before 3000 BCE. No tools or settlements or other monuments from that period. The debate remains unresolved, with each side marshalling evidence and neither willing to concede. But whether the Sphinx is 4,500 or 12,000 years old, its purpose remains mysterious. Its body is that of a lion, a creature that held powerful symbolic meaning in ancient Egypt, representing strength, protection, and the fierce heat of the sun. Its face is human, creating a hybrid creature that bridges the animal and divine realms. In Egyptian tradition, the Sphinx was a guardian, a protector of sacred places, a creature that posed riddles to those who approached. What riddle does the Sphinx of Giza pose? What is it guarding? Some believe the Sphinx sits above hidden chambers, secret rooms that contain the lost knowledge of ancient Egypt, or of an even older civilization. In the 1990s, ground-penetrating radar and seismic studies suggested the presence of voids beneath the Sphinx and in the bedrock around it. Edgar Cayce, the famous American psychic, claimed in the 1930s that a hall of records lay hidden beneath the Sphinx, containing the wisdom of Atlantis. When the chamber was opened, he predicted, humanity would gain access to advanced knowledge about energy, healing, and the nature of consciousness itself. Excavations have been limited by the Egyptian government, which is cautious about potentially damaging one of the world's most iconic monuments. Small explorations have revealed shafts and cavities, but nothing matching the grand chamber Cayce described. Yet the possibility haunts researchers and enthusiasts alike. What if there is something down there, waiting to be discovered? What if the ancients really did hide their most important knowledge beneath their most enigmatic monument? Around the Sphinx and pyramids, other structures add to the mystery. The Valley Temple and the Sphinx Temple, built from massive limestone blocks weighing up to 200 tons, display a style of construction distinctly different from the pyramids, more ancient, some argue, with stones fitted together so precisely that no mortar was needed. The causeway that once connected the Valley Temple to Khafre's pyramid stretched nearly a quarter mile and was roofed with stone slabs, creating a processional corridor where rituals were performed. And then there are the boat pits, long trenches carved into the bedrock around the pyramids, some containing disassembled cedar boats sealed in limestone blocks. One of these boats, excavated in 1954, was reassembled and found to be 143 feet long, one of the largest and oldest ships ever discovered. It had never been in water. It was built specifically to be buried. Was it meant to carry the pharaoh's spirit across the celestial Nile? Or did it serve some other symbolic function we no longer understand? Every element of the Giza complex seems to carry meaning, to be part of a larger design. The three pyramids, the Sphinx, the temples, the causeways, the boat pits, all of them aligned, positioned, built according to a master plan that unified earth and sky, life and death, the human and the divine. The Giza Plateau was not just a burial ground. It was a sacred landscape, a three-dimensional map of Egyptian cosmology. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was also a message, encoded in stone, meant to be read by those who came after. In recent decades, technology has allowed us to see the pyramids in ways the ancient Egyptians never could, and in ways that, raise new questions even as they answer old ones. In 2017, an international team of researchers used muon tomography, a technique that detects cosmic ray particles passing through solid matter, to scan the interior of the Great Pyramid. They discovered a previously unknown void above the Grand Gallery, a space at least 100 feet long with a similar structure to the Grand Gallery itself. The discovery made headlines around the world, a hidden chamber in the Great Pyramid, unseen for 4,500 years. But what is it? Why is it there? The researchers were careful to call it a void rather than a chamber, noting that they couldn't determine its function without further exploration. Egyptologists suggested it might be a structural feature, a relieving chamber meant to reduce the weight pressing down on the Grand Gallery below. Others speculated it could be a sealed room containing treasures or inscriptions, deliberately hidden by the pyramid's architects. As of now, the void remains unexplored. The Egyptian authorities have been reluctant to allow invasive techniques that might damage the pyramid, and there is no easy way to access the space without drilling or excavating. So it sits there, a tantalizing mystery within the greatest mystery of the ancient world, waiting. Other technologies have revealed different secrets. LiDAR scanning, using laser light to create detailed three-dimensional maps, has shown that the pyramids are not quite as smooth and regular as they appear to the naked eye. The Great Pyramid's sides are actually slightly concave, curving inward by about a foot on each face. This feature is invisible from the ground, but becomes apparent from aerial photographs taken at the right angle and time of day. Why would the ancient Egyptians build this concavity into the structure? Some believe it was meant to create an optical effect, making the pyramid appear to shimmer or glow when the sun hit it at certain angles. Others suggest it served a structural purpose, distributing weight more evenly. Still, others wonder if it carries symbolic meaning, representing the curvature of the Earth or the path of light rays from the sun. Thermal imaging has revealed that different blocks within the pyramids retain heat at different rates, suggesting they came from different quarries, or were treated differently during construction. Some blocks contain fossils of ancient marine creatures, proof that the limestone was formed from the beds of prehistoric seas. Analysing these fossils allows researchers to trace where specific stones came from, mapping the supply chains that brought materials to Giza from across Egypt. Even more remarkable, archaeologists have discovered the remains of ramps, workshops, and harbour facilities that supported the pyramid construction. At Wadi al-Jarf on the Red Sea coast, researchers found papyrus scrolls written by a man named Mera, an overseer who helped to transport limestone blocks from the quarries at Tura to Giza. The scrolls, dating to the reign of Khufu, describe the logistics of moving stone, the number of workers, the routes taken, the time required. They are the only contemporary written records of pyramid construction ever found, and they confirm what archaeology has suggested. The pyramids were built through meticulous planning, vast organisational effort, and the coordinated labour of thousands. But even with all these technological advances, even with new discoveries and better data, the fundamental mystery remains. We know more about how the pyramids were built, but we still don't entirely understand why they were built the way they were. We can see the stones, measure the angles, trace the supply chains, but we cannot fully grasp the vision that motivated their creation. Because the vision was not technological. It was not even primarily architectural. It was spiritual, cosmological, an attempt to capture something eternal in temporary materials, to build a bridge between the finite and the infinite. And that is something no technology can measure. Perhaps the most profound mystery of the pyramids is not what they are, but what they represent, what they reveal about the human condition and our relationship with time, mortality, and meaning. We build because we must. It is in our nature to create, to shape the world around us, to leave something behind that says, I was here, I mattered, I existed. Every culture in history has built monuments, from the standing stones of Neolithic Europe to the skyscrapers of modern cities. We build to honour our gods, to remember our dead, to celebrate our achievements, to mark our territory, to express our dreams. But the pyramids are different. They were not built to serve a temporary need or to impress a contemporary audience. They were built to last forever, and they have succeeded. They have outlasted the language that named them, the religion that sanctified them, the civilization that created them. They have become universal symbols, recognized by every culture on Earth, transcending their original context to speak to something fundamental in the human experience. What do they speak of? They speak of the desire to transcend death, to create something that will endure when our bodies have turned to dust. They speak of the human need for order, for structure, for permanence in a world of chaos and change. They speak of our fascination with the heavens, our conviction that we are connected to something larger than ourselves. They speak of the power of collective effort, of what can be achieved when thousands of people work together toward a shared goal. But perhaps, most profoundly, they speak of the human relationship with mystery itself. We live in an age that values answers, that seeks to explain everything, to reduce the unknown to the known. We sequence genomes, map the cosmos, peer into the quantum realm. We accumulate data, build models, predict outcomes. We have grown uncomfortable with uncertainty, with questions that have no clear solutions. The pyramids remind us that mystery is not something to be eliminated, but something to be honoured. They remind us that there are things we may never fully understand, and that this is not a failure but a gift. They remind us that the search for meaning is often more important than the meaning itself, that the questions we ask shape who we are just as much as the answers we find. The ancients who built the pyramids understood this. They created a mystery deliberately, encoding layers of meaning that would reveal themselves slowly, over centuries, to those who looked with patience and humility. They knew that future generations would wonder at their achievement, would ask questions, would search for answers, and they knew that in that searching something important would happen. A connection would be made across time, between the living and the dead, between the known and the unknown. That connection is what the pyramids offer us. Not answers, but connection. Not certainty, but wonder. Not explanation, but inspiration. When we stand before the pyramids, we stand in the presence of something that has witnessed the full sweep of recorded history. We stand before a monument that was already ancient when Rome was founded, already legendary when Athens flourished, already mysterious when medieval pilgrims came to marvel at it. We stand before something that will likely still be standing when our own civilization has become history, when our skyscrapers have crumbled and our digital archives have decayed into corruption. And in that moment, we are confronted with our own mortality, not as individuals but as a species, as a civilization, as a moment in time. We are forced to ask, what will we leave behind? What will future generations find when they dig through the ruins of our age? Will they wonder at our achievements as we wonder at the pyramids? Will they ask questions about us as we ask questions about ancient Egypt? Will they find meaning in what we have created, or will they see only the debris of a culture that lost its way? The pyramids challenge us to think beyond our own lifetimes, beyond our own moment in history. They challenge us to create not just for ourselves but for the future, to build things that matter, that endure, that carry meaning across generations. They challenge us to reach for something greater than comfort or convenience, to invest our energy in something that transcends the immediate and the practical. In this way, the pyramids are not just relics of the past. They are mirrors reflecting our own values, our own priorities, our own dreams and fears. What we see in them says as much about us as it does about the people who built them. As the 21st century unfolds, the pyramids continue to inspire new theories, new explorations, new interpretations. Each generation brings its own questions, shaped by its own concerns and shaped by its own understanding of the world. In an age of environmental crisis, some see the pyramids as lessons in sustainability. Structures built without machines, without fossil fuels, without the industrial processes that have brought our own civilization to the brink of ecological collapse. They wonder, could we build something as enduring today, using only human labour and simple tools? Or have we become so dependent on technology that we have lost the fundamental skills and patience required for such a feat? In an age of artificial intelligence and digital technology, some see the pyramids as embodiments of encoded information, massive solid-state storage devices built to preserve knowledge across millennia. They speculate about what might be hidden in the ratios, the measurements, the astronomical alignments, data waiting to be decoded by minds equipped with the right tools and the right perspective. In an age of space exploration, some see the pyramids as Earth's first monuments to the cosmos, our earliest attempt to reach toward the stars, to connect our terrestrial existence with the celestial realm. They imagine future civilizations building pyramids on Mars or the Moon, carrying forward an architectural tradition that began on the Giza Plateau more than 4,000. The Pyramids of Giza are not just monuments to the past. They are bridges to the future, connecting us to the people who built them, reminding us that we are part of a story that began long before we were born and will continue long after we are gone. They are proof that humanity has always looked up at the stars and wondered, always sought to leave a mark, always believed in something beyond the visible world. And as long as the pyramids stand, that belief will endure. The message will remain, waiting in the stone, waiting in the silence, waiting for the next person to stand before them and ask, what were the ancients trying to tell us? Perhaps the answer is that they were trying to tell us we are not alone in time, not alone in space, not alone in our dreams and our fears and our hopes. They were trying to tell us that we are part of something vast and ancient and eternal, something that connects us to every human who has ever lived and every human who will ever live. They were trying to tell us that we matter, that what we build matters, that what we believe matters, that the questions we ask matter, even if we never find the answers. The pyramids stand in the darkness now, their shapes barely visible against the night sky. But they are there, as they have always been, as they will always be. Silent witnesses to the passage of time, keepers of secrets we may never fully understand, monuments to the enduring human spirit. And somewhere in that silence, in that darkness, in that eternal stone, the message waits. The message the ancients tried to tell us. The message we are still learning to hear. What if the pyramids were not built just to honour the dead, but to speak to the living, to send a message across time? The question echoes across the desert, across the centuries, across the vast expanse of human history. And the pyramids, patient and eternal, wait for us to answer. The search for answers has never stopped. Each generation brings new tools, new methods, new ways of peering into the ancient stones. And with each advance, we discover not just answers, but more questions, deeper, stranger, more challenging questions that force us to reconsider everything we thought we knew. In recent years, the pace of discovery has accelerated. Between 2021 and 2023, researchers employed ground-penetrating radar and electrical resistivity tomography to study areas near the Great Pyramid, revealing an anomaly combining a shallow L-shaped structure connected to a deeper structure, with the shallow portion filled in with sand after construction. The purpose of this structure remains unknown, but its very existence suggests that the Giza complex holds secrets still waiting to be uncovered. The technology that made this discovery possible would have seemed like magic to the ancient Egyptians, machines that can see through solid rock, that can map what lies beneath the sand without disturbing a single grain. We send cosmic rays through the pyramids, tracking how they bend and scatter to reveal hidden voids. We bounce radio waves off underground structures, building three-dimensional maps of spaces no human eye has seen in millennia. We measure subtle variations in gravity and magnetism, detecting anomalies that hint at chambers, passages, corridors carved from the living rock. And yet, for all our technological sophistication, we remain humbled by what the ancients achieved. Every new discovery reveals not how simple the pyramids are, but how complex. Not how crude their construction was, but how refined. Not how much we have surpassed them, but how much we still have to learn from them. In 2024, researchers discovered that some 31 pyramids in Egypt may originally have been built along a 64-kilometre-long branch of the Nile, which has long since been buried beneath farmland and desert. This extinct river branch, called the Ahramat branch, had causeways from many pyramids ending at its proposed riverbanks, suggesting it was used for transporting construction materials. The discovery transforms our understanding of the logistical network that made pyramid construction possible. The stones did not have to be dragged across miles of desert. They could be floated on barges, carried by the river itself to the very foot of the construction site. But this raises new questions. When did this branch of the Nile disappear? Was it still flowing during the 4th dynasty, or had it already begun to dry up? Did the ancient Egyptians choose the Giza plateau because of the river, or did they build there despite its remoteness, for reasons we don't yet understand? And what other river branches might have existed connecting other pyramid sites, leaving no trace except in the placement of monuments, that now seem impossibly isolated. The landscape of ancient Egypt was not the landscape we see today. The climate was different, wetter in some periods, drier in others. The river itself wandered across the floodplain, changing course, splitting into branches, reuniting. The desert advanced and retreated. Forest grew where now there is only sand. The world the pyramid builders knew has been erased, buried beneath millennia of change, leaving us to reconstruct it from fragments and shadows. And beneath the surface, there may be more waiting to be found. In March 2025, a team of researchers made headlines with claims of discovering vast underground structures beneath the Khafra pyramid. The announcement spread rapidly across social media and news outlets, with some calling it evidence of an ancient underground city, extending hundreds of feet below the Giza plateau. The researchers claimed to have used satellite-based radar technology to detect chambers, shafts, and interconnected passages far below the pyramid. The response from the archaeological community was swift and sceptical. Egypt's renowned archaeologist Zahi Hawass called the findings fake news, saying the researchers used techniques that are not approved and not validated and lack any scientific basis. Hawass noted that the Khafra pyramid was studied extensively and determined to have been carved directly from bedrock, making all claims regarding the existence of columns beneath it entirely unfounded. Other experts questioned the technical feasibility of the claims. Radar specialists pointed out that the technology described would not be able to penetrate solid rock to the depths claimed, and that mapping detailed structures hundreds of feet underground from satellite imagery would be impossible with current methods. The research had not been published in peer-reviewed journals, and the methodology remained unclear. Yet the episode reveals something important about our relationship with the pyramids. We want them to hold secrets. We need them to be more than they appear. The idea of hidden chambers, underground cities, lost knowledge waiting to be discovered. These narratives speak to something deep in the human psyche. We are drawn to mystery, to the possibility that beneath the known world lies another world, stranger and more wondrous. And sometimes, that need for mystery leads us astray. It tempts us to see patterns where none exist, to accept claims without evidence, to prefer speculation over science. The pyramids have spawned countless theories, many of them fanciful, some of them deliberately deceptive. Crystal skulls, alien architects, time machines, energy weapons. The pyramids have been credited with everything from healing powers to prophecies of the apocalypse. But separating fact from fiction, legitimate research from pseudoscience, is not always easy. The line between revolutionary discovery and wishful thinking can be thin. New technologies do reveal hidden structures. The 2017 muon tomography scan that found the void above the Grand Gallery was real science, published in peer-reviewed journals, confirmed by multiple independent teams. But claims must be tested, verified, scrutinized before they can be accepted. The pyramids deserve better than sensationalism. They deserve serious study, careful analysis, honest inquiry. They deserve our respect, not just for what we imagine them to be, but for what they actually are. Monuments built by real people, with real tools for real purposes that we're still learning to understand. Amid all the speculation about advanced technology and lost civilizations, it is easy to forget the most important truth about the pyramids. They were built by human beings, not gods, not aliens, not some vanished super race, but people, men and women who lived and worked and died on the Giza plateau 4,500 years ago. Recent discoveries have brought these people into sharper focus. At the site of Tombos in Nubia, archaeologists unearthed skeletons buried within pyramids dating to between 1400 and 650 BCE, with some individuals showing signs of wear and tear likely caused by a lifetime of hard manual labour. This has led researchers to conclude that pyramid burials in Tombos were more inclusive than previously thought, and that the deceased came from both the upper and lower classes. The discovery challenges long-held assumptions about who was honoured with pyramid burial. For generations, archaeologists assumed that only the elite, royalty, nobility, high-ranking officials, were laid to rest in these monumental tombs. But the evidence suggests a more complex reality. Perhaps the pyramids were not just monuments to individual power, but communal projects that honoured all who participated in their creation. Perhaps the workers who dragged the stones, who carved the blocks, who mixed the mortar, were remembered alongside the kings they served. This fits with what we know about the workers' villages near the pyramids. These were not slave quarters but organised communities with infrastructure, social hierarchies, and a sense of collective purpose. The people who lived there were farmers during the flood season, when their fields were underwater and agricultural work was impossible. They came to Giza to work on the pyramids as a form of labour tax, contributing their strength to the most important project in the kingdom. But they also came for other reasons. They came because working on the pyramid meant being part of something eternal, something that would outlast their brief lives. They came because it brought honour to their families, recognition to their villages. They came because they believed, genuinely, deeply believed, that the pyramid was necessary, that it would ensure the pharaoh's transformation into a god and thereby guarantee the prosperity of Egypt itself. We have lost this sense of collective purpose, this willingness to sacrifice for something beyond immediate benefit. Our societies are fragmented, individualistic, focused on short-term gains. We struggle to coordinate projects that span decades, let alone centuries. We cannot imagine devoting our lives to building something we will never see completed. Yet the pyramid builders did exactly that. The Great Pyramid took 20 years to build, an entire generation of workers who began the project knowing they might not live to see it finished. They laid stones that would be buried within the structure, invisible to future generations, yet they laid them with precision and care because the work itself mattered, not the recognition. This is perhaps the most profound lesson the pyramids teach us. That meaning is not found in personal glory or individual achievement, but in contributing to something larger than ourselves. The pyramid is greater than any single person who built it, greater than the pharaoh entombed within it, greater than the architects who designed it. It is the sum of thousands of individual efforts, coordinated toward a single vision, sustained across decades by shared belief. Can we do that today? Can we build our own pyramids? Not literal monuments of stone, but projects of comparable ambition and permanence? Can we think in centuries rather than quarters? Can we work toward goals we will not live to see achieved? Can we create things meant not for ourselves, but for the distant future? The question is not rhetorical. Humanity faces challenges that require exactly this kind of long-term thinking. Climate change, resource depletion, space exploration, the preservation of knowledge across generations. We need to build metaphorical pyramids, infrastructure, institutions, archives, that will endure long after we're gone. We need to rediscover the mindset that made the pyramids possible. The pyramids have stood for 45 centuries. Think about what that means. Think about everything they have witnessed. They were already ancient when the first Olympic Games were held in Greece. They were already monuments of unfathomable age when Julius Caesar came to Egypt and stood before them, marvelling at their antiquity. They were already older to the Roman Empire than the Roman Empire is to us. They watched as the ancient Egyptian civilization slowly declined, as the new kingdom gave way to foreign rule, as Greeks and Romans and Arabs conquered the land. They watched as the old religion was abandoned, as the temples were closed, as the hieroglyphic script was forgotten. They watched as Christianity spread across the region, as churches were built from the stones of ancient monuments, as the old gods were condemned as demons. They watched the rise of Islam, the Arab conquest of Egypt, the building of Cairo from the casing stones stripped from their sides. They watched the Crusades, the wars between Christian and Muslim powers fighting over this ancient land. They watched the Mongol invasions that devastated so much of the world, but somehow left Egypt intact. They watched as the Ottoman Empire absorbed Egypt into its vast domains, as European powers began to take interest in the ancient monuments, as Napoleon's soldiers fired cannons at the Sphinx's face, or so the legend says. Though the truth is more prosaic, the face was already damaged by centuries of erosion and iconoclasm. They watched the birth of Egyptology as a discipline, as Western scholars descended on Egypt with shovels and dynamite, racing to unearth treasures for their museums. They watched as hieroglyphics were decoded, as ancient texts were translated, as the world began to understand, slowly, incompletely, what the ancient Egyptians had been trying to say. They watched as Egypt gained independence, as nationalism grew, as the modern nation struggled to balance reverence for its ancient past with the demands of the present. They watched as tourism became an industry, as millions of visitors came each year to stand before them, to take photographs, to add their own interpretations to the endless catalogue of theories and speculations. They watched wars fought over Suez, revolutions that toppled governments, the Arab Spring that swept across the region, promising change that never quite came. They watched the construction of the Aswan Dam, which controlled the Nile's flooding and ended the annual cycle that had defined Egyptian civilization for millennia. And through it all, they remained, silent, unchanging, patient. What will they witness in the centuries to come? Will humanity survive the challenges ahead, or will future archaeologists dig through the ruins of our civilization as we dig through theirs? Will the pyramids still be standing when our own greatest monuments have crumbled to dust? And if they are, what will they mean to whoever stands before them? Perhaps they will mean nothing. Perhaps they will be incomprehensible, their purpose forgotten, their builders nameless, their messages unreadable. We struggle to understand them now with all our knowledge of ancient Egypt, with all our technological tools and scholarly expertise. How much harder will it be for civilizations that come after, if the chain of knowledge is broken, if the memory of Egypt is lost? Or perhaps they will mean everything. Perhaps they will be the last surviving testament to humanity's existence. Proof that we were here, that we built, that we dreamed of eternity and came as close to achieving it as any civilization has ever come. The pyramids do not care what we think of them. They do not need our theories. Or we have spoken of the pyramids as monuments, as mysteries, as messages across time. But there is another story hidden within these stones, a story of economics, of resources, of the immense organizational machinery required to transform an entire kingdom into a pyramid-building civilization. This is not the romantic tale of pharaohs reaching for the stars, but the practical reality of how thousands of people were fed, housed, managed, and coordinated across decades. It is the story of how building for eternity shaped the world of the living. Consider the numbers. The Great Pyramid contains approximately 2.3 million blocks of stone, each weighing on average 2.5 tons. The total mass is estimated at 5.75 million tons. To build it in 20 years, the generally accepted timeline for Khufu's reign, means moving and setting roughly 12 blocks per hour, every hour, day and night, for 2 decades. Even if we assume they worked only during daylight hours, and only during the 8 months of the year when the Nile wasn't flooding the fields, the pace would still require setting a block every 2 to 3 minutes. But the pyramid itself is only part of the equation. For every stone placed, there were quarrymen cutting blocks from limestone cliffs, workers transporting them across the Nile, labourers dragging them up ramps, masons dressing and fitting them into place. There were surveyors ensuring the measurements remained precise, architects overseeing the design, scribes recording deliveries and tracking workers, priests performing rituals to sanctify the work, and all these people needed to eat. The logistics are staggering. Estimates suggest that between 20,000 and 30,000 workers were directly involved in pyramid construction at any given time, with perhaps another 60,000 to 100,000 people supporting them. Farmers growing food, bakers making bread, brewers fermenting beer, potters creating vessels, weavers making cloth, fishermen hauling catches from the Nile. The entire economy of Egypt, for those 20 years, was organised around the singular goal of building Khufu's monument. Archaeological evidence from the workers' villages tells us what they ate. The diet was surprisingly rich: bread and beer, the staples of Egyptian cuisine, but also beef, mutton, fish, and fowl. Bones found in the refuse heap show that the workers consumed huge quantities of meat, far more than the average Egyptian. One estimate suggests that to feed the workforce, Egypt needed to slaughter 21 cattle and 23 sheep per day. Over 20 years, that's more than 150,000 cattle and 170,000 sheep, not counting the fish and birds. Where did all this food come from? Egypt's agricultural surplus generated by the annual flooding of the Nile was legendary. The river's floods deposited nutrient-rich silt across the floodplain, creating some of the most fertile farmland in the ancient world. Egyptian farmers could produce far more grain than they needed for subsistence, and this surplus became the foundation of pyramid building. Farmers paid taxes in grain, which was stored in vast state granaries and redistributed to workers as rations. But the pyramid project demanded more than just the agricultural surplus. It required a complete reorganization of Egyptian society. During the Old Kingdom, Egypt transformed from a collection of regional powers into a highly centralized state with the pharaoh at its apex. The pyramid was both symbol and engine of this transformation. Building it required developing systems of taxation, labor conscription, resource allocation, and bureaucratic record-keeping that wouldn't be matched in complexity until the Roman Empire. The papyrus scrolls found at Wadi al-Jarf give us a glimpse into this bureaucratic machine. Written by Me'er, an inspector in charge of a work gang, they describe in meticulous detail how limestone blocks were transported from the Tura quarries to Giza. Me'er records the number of workers in his team, about 40, the routes they took, the time required for each journey, even the locations where they stopped for the night. This level of documentation suggests a sophisticated administrative system capable of tracking thousands of work gangs, managing supply chains across hundreds of miles, and coordinating their efforts with split-second precision. The economic impact rippled through every level of society. Quarries had to be opened and maintained. The Tura quarries, which provided the fine white limestone for the pyramid's casing stones, were located across the Nile from Giza. The Aswan quarries, source of the red granite used in the king's chamber, were 500 miles to the south. Opening these quarries required investment in tools, infrastructure, and permanent settlements for the quarry workers. Copper tools had to be manufactured in vast quantities, thousands of chisels and saws that would wear out and need replacement. Egypt's copper came primarily from the Sinai Peninsula, requiring mining operations and trade networks to keep the tools flowing. Transportation infrastructure had to be built and maintained. Harbours were constructed along the Nile to receive stone shipments. Canals may have been dug to connect the river to the construction site. Reducing the overland distance stones had to travel. Roads or sledgeways had to be prepared, levelled and kept wet so that wooden sledges could slide more easily. Ramps had to be constructed from mud brick and stone chips, requiring their own supply chains and labour forces. The construction site itself was a small city. Archaeological excavations near the pyramids have revealed bakeries capable of producing thousands of loaves per day, breweries with massive vats for fermenting beer, workshops for copperworking, carpentry, rope making, and pottery. There were administrative buildings where scribes worked, storage facilities for tools and materials, and presumably hospitals or clinics where injured workers could be treated. The workers lived in organised housing, not luxurious but functional, with sleeping quarters, communal cooking areas, and access to fresh water. This infrastructure didn't appear overnight. It developed gradually over the course of the 3rd and 4th dynasties, refined with each successive pyramid. By the time Khufu began his pyramid, Egypt had been building pyramids for about 75 years. The Step Pyramid of Djoser, completed around 2650 BCE, was the first, and it was followed by several others of varying success, some completed, some abandoned, some that partially collapsed during construction. Each taught valuable lessons about engineering, logistics, and organisation. But the Great Pyramid represented the apex of this learning curve. It was the largest, most precise, most ambitious pyramid ever built, and perhaps not coincidentally, it marked the peak of Egypt's pyramid-building era. The pyramids that came after, those of Khafra and Menkaure at Giza, and the later 5th and 6th dynasty pyramids at Saqqara and Abu Sir, were smaller, less precisely constructed, built with inferior materials and less ambitious designs. By the end of the Old Kingdom, around 2200 BCE, pyramid building had essentially ceased. Why? What changed? The decline of pyramid building is one of Egyptian history's great puzzles, and it may tell us as much about the pyramid's purpose as their construction does. The answer likely involves a combination of economic exhaustion, political fragmentation, and changing religious beliefs. Building the Great Pyramid was an enormous economic undertaking, perhaps the single largest infrastructure project relative to GDP that any civilization has attempted. Modern economists have tried to estimate the cost, and while exact figures are impossible, the scale is clear. For 20 years, perhaps a quarter to a third of Egypt's entire economic output was directed toward pyramid construction. That level of sustained investment is extraordinary. It's comparable to the United States devoting $7 to $10 trillion per year, roughly half the entire federal budget, to a single project for 2 decades. No modern nation could sustain such an effort without serious economic consequences. Ancient Egypt managed it, but the strain must have been immense. The pyramid required not just labour and materials, but opportunity cost. Every worker building the pyramid was a worker not building something else, not constructing temples or palaces, not clearing new farmland, not strengthening fortifications. Every ton of copper fashioned into chisels for quarrying was copper that couldn't be made into weapons or tools for agriculture. Every load of grain fed to pyramid workers was grain not available for other purposes. For a society to accept such costs, the perceived benefit must be enormous. And in the Fourth Dynasty, it apparently was. The pyramid wasn't just a tomb, it was the mechanism by which cosmic order was maintained, the device that transformed the dead king into a god who would continue to protect Egypt from chaos. Building the pyramid was thus a form of insurance, a massive collective investment in the kingdom's continued prosperity. But as pyramid followed pyramid, as generations of Egyptians devoted their labour to these monuments, something began to shift. Perhaps the economic burden became too great. Perhaps successive pharaohs found it harder to command the loyalty and resources that Khufu had enjoyed. Perhaps the very success of the early pyramids undermined the rationale for building more. If Khufu and Khafra had already achieved godhood through their pyramids, did every subsequent pharaoh need an equally massive monument? We see evidence of this shift in the pyramids themselves. Menkaura's pyramid, third of the Giza trio and last of the Fourth Dynasty giants, is less than half the height of the Great Pyramid and contains only about 1/10 the mass. The Fifth Dynasty pyramids are smaller still, built not from massive limestone blocks but from smaller stones and rubble fill, with only the outer casing constructed from fine stone. The quality of workmanship declined. The precision that characterized the Great Pyramid, stones fitted so tightly that a knife blade cannot pass between them, gave way to rougher construction, with mortar filling the gaps. This wasn't because the Egyptians had forgotten how to build properly. The decline was gradual, which suggests a conscious choice to reduce costs. Pharaohs still wanted pyramids. The symbolism remained important, but they could no longer or would no longer devote the same resources to them. The pyramid was being scaled back to a more sustainable level. By the Sixth Dynasty, the pyramids had become almost hollow shells, small in stature and filled with rubble. But something else appeared. Texts. The pyramid. Texts carved into the walls of the chambers were dense collections of spells, hymns, and instructions for the dead king's journey through the afterlife. Perhaps as the physical pyramid diminished, the word became more important, the magic of language compensating for the reduced magic of monumental architecture. Then came the collapse. Around 2200 BCE, the Old Kingdom fell apart in what historians call the First Intermediate Period. Central authority dissolved, Egypt fragmented into competing regional powers. The causes are debated: climate change leading to reduced Nile floods, internal political struggles, economic exhaustion from pyramid building, or some combination of all three. For over a century, Egypt had no strong central government, no powerful pharaohs, and no pyramids. When centralized rule was eventually restored in the Middle Kingdom around 2000 BCE, pyramid building resumed, but it was never the same. Middle Kingdom pyramids were built primarily of mud brick with stone casings, and most have eroded away to shapeless mounds. The passion for massive stone monuments had been extinguished. By the New Kingdom, 1550 to 1070 BCE, the era of Egypt's greatest imperial power, when pharaohs conquered vast territories and accumulated unimaginable wealth, pyramid building had ceased entirely. The great pharaohs of this period, Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Ramesses III, built magnificent temples instead, vast columned halls decorated with intricate reliefs, but no pyramids. They were buried in the Valley of the Kings, in tombs cut deep into the bedrock of desert cliffs, hidden from view and, theoretically, safe from robbers. The economic calculus had changed. A hidden tomb required far less labour and material than a massive pyramid. It could be built quickly and secretly. And in an era when tomb robbery had become endemic, by the New Kingdom, even the Great Pyramid had been thoroughly plundered. Visibility was a liability rather than an asset. But perhaps there was also a theological shift. The New Kingdom religion was different from that of the Old Kingdom. The sun god Ra had always been important, but now he merged with Amun to become Amun-Ra, the supreme deity, and pharaohs emphasized their role as his servant rather than his equal. The pyramid, which symbolized the rays of the sun and the pharaoh's direct ascent to the heavens, may have seemed presumptuous in this new religious context. The pharaoh was still divine, but perhaps not quite in the same way. Or perhaps more prosaically, the Egyptians had simply learned that massive visible monuments attracted looters. The pyramids' most famous quality, their eternal endurance, worked against their purpose as tombs. You cannot steal from a tomb you cannot find, but everyone knew where the pyramids were. Yet to view pyramids purely through the lens of economics and theology misses something crucial. The pyramids weren't just drains on resources or expressions of religious belief. They were identity-forming exercises, massive communal projects that united Egypt and defined what it meant to be Egyptian. Consider what it meant for a farmer from a small village in the Delta to be conscripted for pyramid building. He would leave his home during the flood season, when his fields were underwater and he couldn't work them anyway, and travel to Giza. There he would encounter Egyptians from every region, from Upper Egypt in the south, from the Fayoum oasis, from settlements along the Mediterranean coast. He would hear different accents, learn different customs, eat communal meals with strangers who would become comrades. For 4 months, he would participate in the most important project in the kingdom, working alongside thousands of others toward a common goal. He would see the pyramid rising block by block, witness priests performing rituals, hear scribes reading proclamations from the pharaoh. He would understand himself as part of something vast, something that transcended his village and his individual life. Then he would return home with stories to tell, having helped build something that would last forever. This experience was repeated across generations, involving hundreds of thousands of Egyptians over the course of the Pyramid Age. It created a shared identity, a sense of national unity that might not have existed otherwise. Egypt in the Old Kingdom was a relatively new state, formed from the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt only a few centuries earlier. Regional identities remained strong. The Pyramid Project helped forge these disparate peoples into something resembling a nation. The pyramid also created a shared landscape of memory. Every Egyptian knew the pyramids. They dominated the skyline, visible from miles away, constant reminders of pharaonic power and divine protection. They were reference points, literally and figuratively, monuments that helped Egyptians orient themselves in space and time. Events could be dated in relation to pyramid construction. In the year that Pharaoh's pyramid was completed, or when my grandfather worked on the Great Monument, stories accumulated around the pyramids. Even in ancient times, they became the subjects of legends. By the time Herodotus visited Egypt in the 5th century BCE, more than 2,000 years after the Great Pyramid's construction, the Egyptians were telling him tales about its building, some accurate, some wildly embellished. They told him 100,000 men worked on it for 20 years, which may be roughly correct for the total workforce, including support staff. But they also told him the pharaoh was so wicked he forced his own daughter into prostitution to raise funds, which is almost certainly fiction. Perhaps a story invented by Egyptians who no longer understood or approved of the immense resources devoted to these monuments. The pyramid became a screen onto which later Egyptians projected their own values and concerns. During periods of strong central authority, the pyramids were celebrated as symbols of Egypt's greatness and the pharaoh's power. During periods of fragmentation, they might be viewed more ambiguously, as symbols of excess, of pharaonic pride, of resources that could have been better spent. But they remained central to Egyptian consciousness, impossible to ignore or forget. Even as pyramid building ceased, the pyramids themselves continued to shape Egyptian culture. Later pharaohs often built their tombs or temples in sight of the Great Pyramids, as if seeking to borrow some of their power. The pyramids became pilgrimage sites, places where Egyptians would go to pray or leave offerings, even though they no longer fully understood their original purpose. The Great Pyramid in particular seems to have remained a focus of popular reverence throughout Egyptian history. This continued even after Egypt ceased to be ruled by ethnic Egyptians. The Persian conquerors respected the pyramids. The Ptolemaic Greeks, who ruled Egypt after Alexander's conquest, were fascinated by them and commissioned studies of their construction. Cleopatra, last of the Ptolemaic rulers, would have seen the pyramids as ancient monuments to a civilization that was already more distant from her in time than she is from us. Yet they remained symbols of Egypt, fundamental to the country's identity in a way that transcended political changes. But the pyramids also reinforced and perpetuated a particular social order, one based on extreme hierarchy, and the absolute supremacy of the pharaoh. To build a pyramid required not just organization but obedience, not just coordination but submission to centralized authority. The pyramid was possible only because thousands of people accepted the premise that the pharaoh was divine, that his needs superseded theirs, that their labor was owed to him as surely as the Nile's floods were owed to the gods. This social contract, if we can call it that, was neither simple nor unchanging. It required constant reinforcement through ritual, through art, through the physical presence of monuments like the pyramids. The pyramid itself was an argument made in stone. The pharaoh is godlike, capable of commanding forces beyond normal human capacity, deserving of worship and sacrifice. Consider the visual rhetoric of the pyramid. It dominates everything around it, reducing humans to insignificance. When you stand before the Great Pyramid, you feel small. That's not accidental. The pyramid's massive scale creates an emotional response, a sense of awe that easily shades into submission. This is the architecture of power, designed to overwhelm and impress. The same message was conveyed through every aspect of pyramid construction. The work gangs had names like Friends of Khufu, emphasizing their personal relationship to the pharaoh. The graffiti they left behind expresses pride in their service to him. The entire enterprise was framed as an act of devotion, a gift to the god-king who guaranteed Egypt's prosperity. Whether the workers genuinely believed this or whether they simply accepted it as the natural order of things, we cannot know. But the system worked. For centuries, Egyptians devoted their labor to these monuments with apparently minimal coercion. Yet there was always tension in this arrangement. The pharaoh's divinity was both absolute and fragile. It required constant performance, constant demonstration of capability and divine favor. A weak pharaoh, one who could not maintain mayat or command respect, undermined the entire system, and a pyramid half-built or poorly constructed would be evidence of that weakness, visible to everyone. This may explain why some pyramids were never completed or were abandoned in favor of new ones. If a pharaoh died before his pyramid was finished, or if the project encountered insurmountable difficulties, it called into question his divine status. Better to start fresh, to demonstrate strength through a new monument, than to struggle with a compromised one. The pyramid also reinforced class distinctions beyond just the pharaoh's supremacy. The workers' villages show clear hierarchies. Some workers lived in better housing than others. Some ate better food. Foremen and skilled craftsmen occupied a different social stratum than common labourers. Scribes and administrators, though they might never touch a stone, were considered more important than the men who moved them. And of course, the vast majority of Egyptians never worked on the pyramids at all. Women, who comprised half the population, were largely excluded from construction labour, though they surely participated in the supporting economy, weaving cloth, preparing food, managing households while men were away. Children were too young to be conscripted. The elderly, the infirm, those with specialised roles that couldn't be spared, all were exempted. So the pyramid workforce was a particular cross-section of society. Adult men in their prime, temporarily removed from their normal roles and reconstituted as builders. But this temporary status was important. Unlike slaves, these workers retained their identities, their families, their places in their home communities. They worked on the pyramid for a few months and then returned home. This rotation system may have been crucial to the pyramid's success. It distributed both the burden and the honour across the kingdom rather than concentrating them. Yet this system also had limits. It required a strong state capable of organising conscription, transporting workers, providing them with tools and food, and ensuring they returned home safely. When the state weakened, the system collapsed. The end of pyramid building may have been both cause and effect of state decline. The inability to mobilise labour for pyramids was a sign of failing central authority, while the absence of pyramid projects removed one of the mechanisms that had reinforced that authority. But the pyramid's impact on Egyptian life didn't end when construction finished. A completed pyramid required ongoing maintenance and religious observance, creating permanent institutions that persisted for centuries. Each pyramid complex included not just the pyramid itself, but mortuary temples where priests performed daily rituals to sustain the dead pharaoh's care in the afterlife. These weren't occasional ceremonies, but daily obligations, offerings of food and drink, recitations of prayers, burning of incense. The priests who performed these services were full-time professionals, supported by endowments of land and resources that the pharaoh had established specifically for this purpose. These pyramid cults, as Egyptologists call them, were substantial economic enterprises. The mortuary temple of Khufu, for instance, had extensive agricultural lands assigned to it, worked by farmers whose produce went to feed the priests and provide offerings. There were also personnel beyond the priests, bakers to prepare ritual bread, brewers for beer offerings, florists to provide fresh flowers, guards to protect the complex, scribes to manage accounts. Archaeological evidence suggests these institutions were remarkably durable. The pyramid cult of Khufu continued functioning for at least 500 years after his death, possibly longer. 5th and 6th dynasty texts mention officials with titles like Inspector of Priests of the Pyramid of Khufu, indicating that centuries after his death, the Great Pyramid still had an active religious establishment. This means that for ordinary Egyptians living near Giza, the pyramids were not just ancient monuments, but living religious centres. People would have seen priests coming and going, witnessed ceremonies, smelled incense burning, heard prayers and hymns. The pyramids were woven into the fabric of daily religious life. Moreover, ordinary Egyptians apparently had some access to these cult centres. We know from inscriptions that people left graffiti at pyramid sites, including prayers requesting the dead pharaoh's intercession. Some scholars believe that during certain festivals, pyramid complexes may have been open to pilgrims, allowing common people to approach and make offerings. The pyramid was thus not just a symbol of pharaonic power, but a site of popular religious devotion. Maintenance was also an ongoing concern. The pyramid's limestone casing required care to remain pristine and reflective. Sand would blow against the bases, requiring periodic clearing. The mortuary temples needed repairs. Causeways had to be kept passable. All this required labour and resources, providing employment for generations of Egyptians who never worked on the original construction, but spent their lives maintaining it. There are records of later pharaohs sponsoring restoration work on older pyramids, sometimes centuries after they were built. This served multiple purposes. It demonstrated respect for ancestors, showcased the pharaoh's piety and resources, and maintained the pyramid as a functioning religious site. But it also suggests that the pyramids, for all their durability, were not maintenance-free. Left unattended, they would deteriorate. The reason they survived is partly because Egyptians actively preserved them for many centuries, but eventually the pyramid cults did cease. The records grow sparse after the Old Kingdom's collapse. Some cults were revived during the Middle Kingdom, when centralized authority was restored, but never with the same vigor. By the New Kingdom, most Old Kingdom pyramids had abandoned mortuary temples, their priests dispersed, their endowments reassigned. What happened to these institutions? Several factors likely contributed to their decline. The economic disruptions of the First Intermediate Period may have destroyed the administrative systems that supported them. Land endowments could have been seized by local warlords or repurposed by new authorities. The priests lacking support would have dispersed to find other employment. There may also have been a crisis of belief. If the pyramid was supposed to ensure the pharaoh's eternal life and Egypt's continued prosperity, but Egypt descended into chaos anyway, did that not suggest the pyramid had failed? Perhaps later Egyptians began to question whether all that investment had been worthwhile, or perhaps, more pragmatically, later pharaohs simply had different priorities. Why continue supporting the cult of a pharaoh from 1,000 years ago when resources were needed for current projects? The New Kingdom was an age of empire, of military campaigns and monumental temple building. The old pyramids, their pharaohs long dead and largely forgotten, may have seemed like relics from another world. Whatever the reasons, by the time of the New Kingdom, the Giza pyramids had become essentially what they are today, imposing monuments from the distant past, admired and wondered at but no longer functioning as religious centres. They had transitioned from living institutions to historical artefacts, from active temples to passive monuments. This transition was gradual and uneven. Some pyramid cults lingered longer than others. The Great Pyramid seems to have retained religious significance even when its cult ceased. People continued to visit it, leave offerings, treat it as sacred space. But the daily rituals, the professional priesthood, the vast supporting apparatus, all that slowly eroded away. And then came the looters. The pyramids had always been targets for thieves, Tomb robbery was apparently widespread even in ancient times, and severe punishments attest to how common the problem was. But as long as the pyramid cults functioned, as long as priests and guards were present, the tombs retained some protection. Once those institutions collapsed, the pyramids were vulnerable. We know that by the Middle Kingdom, probably earlier, the pyramids had been thoroughly plundered. The treasures that once filled their chambers, gold, jewels, fine furniture, ritual objects, were stolen. Even the pharaoh's mummies were torn apart in the search for amulets and jewellery wrapped in the bandages. The Great Pyramid's sarcophagus was found empty when medieval Arabs first entered the king's chamber. Whether it had ever held a body is now uncertain. Later still, the pyramids were quarried for building materials. The fine white limestone casing stones were particularly prized. They were already cut and dressed, ready to be used in new construction. Medieval Cairo was built partly from pyramids, with casing stones from Giza repurposed for mosques, palaces, and fortifications. This wasn't vandalism in the sense of purposeless destruction. It was practical recycling. Stone was valuable, and here were millions of tons of it, already quarried and shaped. By this process, the pyramids that had been built to last forever were slowly dismantled by the very civilizations they were meant to outlast. The irony is profound, yet enough remained, the massive core blocks were too large and heavy to be worth moving, that the essential pyramid form survived. The smooth, gleaming pyramids of the Fourth Dynasty became the rough-stepped structures we see today, stripped of their casings, weathered and worn, but still recognizable, still imposing, still inspiring awe. Despite their decline, the pyramids left a lasting economic and organizational legacy. The systems developed to build them, bureaucratic record-keeping, resource management, large-scale labor mobilization, didn't disappear when pyramid building ceased. They were adapted for other purposes. The New Kingdom's military campaigns required similar organizational capacity, moving armies of thousands across great distances, supplying them with food and equipment, coordinating complex operations. The temples built during this period, while different in form from pyramids, required comparable resources and planning. The tomb-building projects in the Valley of the Kings, though smaller in scale, drew on the same tradition of skilled stoneworking and architectural precision. In a sense, every major project in Egyptian history afterward bore the pyramid's imprint. Egypt had learned how to think big, how to plan across decades, how to coordinate vast numbers of people toward a single goal. That capacity, once developed, remained part of Egyptian civilization's repertoire even when pyramids ceased to be the goal. The pyramids also established Egypt's reputation. For the rest of antiquity, and into the medieval period, Egypt was famous for its monuments, its ancient wisdom, its mysterious and powerful past. This reputation drew scholars, travellers, and traders. It made Egypt attractive to conquerors who wanted to rule such a storied land. It created a form of cultural capital that Egypt could trade on long after its actual power had waned. And perhaps most importantly, the pyramids established the very idea that such projects were possible. They proved that human beings could build on a monumental scale, could create structures that would endure for millennia, could organize society to achieve seemingly impossible goals. Every civilization afterward that built grand monuments, from Rome's aqueducts to China's Great Wall to medieval Europe's cathedrals to modern skyscrapers, is in some sense heir to the pyramid builders. The pyramids taught humanity that we are capable of greatness, that we can reach beyond mere survival to create works of lasting significance. That lesson, encoded in stone on the Giza plateau, may be their most important legacy of all.